Okay, I think I will get started, and any stragglers can kind of join in and when they're ready. Um, good morning and welcome to this Ultima webinar. My name is John Burkitt. I'm one of the senior technical consultants here at Ultima. I work in the productivity team, and my specialist subject is Microsoft Unified Comms. So that started back with OCS, OCS, and then Link and Skype. And for the last year has very much been focused around Microsoft Teams, and helping customers with migration from legacy platforms to Teams, and also exploring how they can use Teams to optimize their workflows and business processes. In today's session, we're specifically going to focus on the Teams and calling functionality within Teams. Agenda-wise, I'm going to run through the features and functionality. I'm also going to go through some of the functionality that was announced at Microsoft Ignite for both pillars, and then dive into kind of a couple of specific areas around meetings and specific areas around calling. A few bits of housekeeping before we get started. The questions panel is open. I'm flying solo today, so what I'll do is I'll answer the questions offline after this session and get back to you, because I think it's going to run to about an hour on the nose. The meeting is being recorded, so you will be sent a link after this session, and you'll also be sent a copy of the slide deck in PDF format, so you'll get both of those after the session. So I think that's all the housekeeping I need to do, been through the agenda. So before we dive into the main event, a quick reminder, Skype for Business Online. Microsoft have announced the end of service date of July 2021. So if you are using that service, please start planning your migrations. It might seem a long way away, but actually it's going to come around very, very quickly. If you are in that position that you're using Skype for Business Online, please do reach out through your account manager. Ultima's more than happy to kind of help with the planning and execution of that. And I guess just a quick clarification, that only applies to Skype for Business Online. Skype for Business On-Premise and Skype for Business Consumer are unaffected, and they're going to carry on and have got their own roadmaps as to kind of how those products are going to be improved and enhanced in the next versions delivered on them. So it's just a quick reminder on that one. Then again, just before we dive into the kind of specifics, because Teams is such a broad product, I kind of carve it up into 4 pillars, which is the kind of chat, which is your instant messaging type functionality, the collaboration elements, which are where kind of Teams came from. So that is your teams and your channels and your kind of collaboration space. You then have meetings, which covers off the online meeting functionality, the audio conferencing, and also the live event services. And then calling, which for me is the PBX replacement kind of element of Teams. And for this session, we're very much going to be focused on the meeting and the calling side of things. So we'll start with meetings. So the meeting experience in Teams has evolved very, very rapidly this year. They've released a lot of new features, a lot of enhancements, some of it specifically to address and keep up with Zoom, which we all know has become a very popular video conferencing platform. Also some functionality to address the education vertical as well. From a feature and functionality point of view, it's got most of what you would expect in there. So you've got obviously the ability to record. One thing to note around the recording is at the moment those recordings get encoded and then stored in Microsoft Streams. That is actually going to be changing in the near future. They're going to be moving across to storing those recordings in OneDrive and SharePoint, which is a good enhancement. It means that all your retention and security policies that you're applying through Office 365 are now going to be applied to that content as well. you've got a rich joining experience. So by that I mean you can join from PCs, from Macs, from Linux machines, either via thick client or in the browsers. There's also the mobile app you can join from. So typically wherever the user is, they'll be able to accept and join these meetings. Screen or video blurring or background blurring got quite a bit of notice when it came out about 3 or 4 months ago now. They've enhanced that by adding policies to actually manage and control what people can do with screen blurring. So you can either, from a policy point of view now, disable it entirely, restrict it to basically the pre-canned Microsoft images, or let users do whatever they want. So there's that additional level of IT administration in there as well now. So again, from a online meeting point of view, it's a very rich experience. It covers off most of what users need kind of day to day. This is what the actual meeting experience looks like when you join it. So you have the lobby where you can keep people waiting, or you can manage the attendance in the meetings. You then have the people actually who are joined in the meetings. Here at the moment you can see someone who's joined in audio, their full telephone number is displayed. I'll come to this on the next slide when I talk about future enhancements, but Microsoft are changing the way that behaves to address some privacy concerns that were brought up. So that's kind of the meeting experience. And then if you have a shared screen, you would get that displayed there as well. From a actual meeting control point of view, and again, these have been enhanced over the course of this year. Some of these bits you'll notice are still in preview, so they'll be hopefully rolling out before the end of the year. But you've got, again, a lot of the standard functionality you would expect, and some quality of life enhancements in here as well. So a big one was the basically prevent attendees from unmuting themselves, important in the educational space, but also if you're using Teams to do larger scale presentations, you'll want the ability to basically keep everyone except presenters muted. Meetings have 3 roles now: the organizer, presenters, and then attendees. By default, everyone you invite comes in as a attendee, and then either during the meeting or from a meeting management control panel, you can give people presenter rights as well. So they've got that slightly more granular control in there as well. A lot of this functionality, you can see, is controllable by our policies as well. So I already spoke about the background effect. The recording, again, you can control it either on a global policy or a per user policy, depending on what your specific requirements are. And a nice feature, which has been in for a while now, but a lot of people have kind of missed, is the kind of raise hand functionality. So you've got up just by the 3 dots, that little hand, so you can actually, in larger meetings, rather than people having to jump in and talk over each other, they can click that button and everyone in the meeting will be notified on the participant list that you've got something to say. So from my point of view, it's a very well-rounded meeting experience, but there's also a lot of controls we can apply to it to either customize it or restrict it to meet individual organizations' requirements. Cloud video interop's an interesting one. I've got a dedicated slide on that later, so I'll kind of walk it through there. I guess the other big one is the WebEx and Zoom integration, which is still being worked on. And that, especially in these kind of hybrid scenarios that we're in now, it gives, or it will give, a lot more flexibility for Teams or team-specific devices to be a bit more flexible and connect to various different platforms. So that'll be a nice enhancement when it finally drops. So Ignite happened a couple of months ago now. A lot of focus on Teams. So what I've done is I've gone through and pulled out some of the bits that are of I'm most interested and excited about. So there's a couple of actually kind of in-meeting enhancements, which is around this together mode. So this is the idea that Microsoft will take your video streams, use some intelligence in the background, and then in effect put everyone into a theatre, so you'll look as though you're sat in a seat rather than just in a video square. Custom layouts are another interesting one, not out yet, but they are on the roadmap and coming soon. And this is when you start to use Teams and Teams meetings as a bit more of a presenting platform. You can customize and design what the start screen will look like, and some customization around the lobby. So that'll be an interesting enhancement. It will be, as it stands at the moment, require the advanced communication license to enable. I talk about that a little bit later on as well. Similarly, in their vein of using Teams meetings and Teams live events as a presenting platform, we're getting registration and reporting functionality. So this is the ability to let people sign up directly. So you schedule a live event, and similarly with the way you guys signed up for this event, you'll be able to support that natively out of Microsoft or out of Teams. Hiding attendees numbers. So this was one I kind of alluded to on the last slide. What they're planning to do from a privacy point of view, when someone does join from a telephone number, they're planning to star out the number except for the last 2 or 3 digits, just so that number isn't being made available to everyone in the meeting. Again, good enhancement from a privacy point of view. My feeling is that will also come with a policy, so again, you can control it per user if you want to, or at an organization level. Spotlight, again, it's kind of, that falls into the using Teams as a presentation platform. What you can do is you can force your video or your screen share to be displayed on the main screen for everyone to see. So it kind of helps with keeping the attention and people focused on what you're delivering. From a live event point of view, and again, this is a bit of a niche feature, but it's one of those ones as people start exploring what you can do with the live event service, it will become interesting. So what you can do when this feature comes out, you'll be able to take live events or the live event feed and push it into something like OBS, which is a video production product. So you can use that to bring in your video feeds, bring in your content, and then use the functionality in OBS to, for example, broadcast that to Twitch, to YouTube live events, and apply graphics and screen transitions and that kind of thing. So it's a nice enhancement that's coming. From the actual specific meeting room point of view, they announced a new type of device, which is the Teams panels, which I'll speak about a little bit further on. In this new kind of COVID world with people planning the return to work, they've also put in a feature around a room capacity. So you would specify how many people you want in a particular meeting room space, and then Teams is intelligent enough to know when you exceed that number of people and actually put a warning up on the screen. It's just a kind of banner warning. So that's an interesting enhancement and very much being driven by the world we're living in now. Again, a slight side note, which is up until now, Microsoft have had 2 classes of meeting room systems, which are the collaboration bars and then the team rooms bundles. They're being merged into one product or one type of device, which is good news. It's going to simplify the management. It should also bring everything up to the same feature and functionality level. And finally, Cisco are now on the Cloud Video Interop certified partners list, which I'll talk about more on my next slide. So, Cloud Video Interop has been around for about a year and a bit now. I think it was kind of one of the big points from Ignite 2019. This is basically a way for customers to carry on leveraging existing video conferencing assets. So if you have a system already in place, which is SIP or H323 based, that can't natively join a Teams meeting. And Microsoft recognized this was a problem. There is a lot of video conferencing equipment out there. It's generally not cheap. So they wanted to provide a way for customers to reuse that investment. So Microsoft's solution was the Cloud Video Interop service. And this is basically a cloud service being provided by 3 partners at the moment. And what it does is it bridges together SIP and H323 based, a SIP and H323 conference into a Teams conference. So you still have a Teams meeting running and you still have the SIP meeting running, and then there is a bridging service which in effect connects those two together. So the 2 main use cases for this are during your transition to a pure Microsoft Teams estate. So while you are sweating those old VC assets or haven't updated them to a Teams only mode, you can still have those video conferencing units join and participate in Teams meetings. And that from Microsoft's point of view, they see as a kind of transitional step to being a pure Microsoft Teams house internally. The other big use case is you can't control what your customers and partners and organizations that you want to collaborate are using from a video conferencing point of view. So if that customer isn't on a team or that partner isn't on a Teams journey, but you still want to engage them in video conferencing meetings, you can use the Cloud Video Interop to facilitate that. So as you can kind of see on the screen here, the meeting invite will have an enhanced bit of information in it, which is how a H323 or a SIP-based device can join into the meeting. So it's a URL plus a conference ID, and that will allow those other devices, non-Teams devices, to join into the meeting and give you the broadest possible reach when it comes to inviting people and devices to meetings. So it's 4 partners at the moment who provide it, which is Poly, Pexip, Busines, and Cisco. They all have slightly different licensing models, but it broadly comes down to you license per SIP or H323 device that you want to concurrently being able to join a meeting. So if you have 10 devices you want to join and you're expecting them all to be joined in at the same time, you would need 10 licenses. And there's a little bit of configuration to be done. It's nothing too overly complex on that point. And as I said, Cisco's a good addition. Between the 4 of those, we can address most video conferencing interop scenarios, or all the ones that I've come across to date with being able to address with that. So it's a good extra tool to have available when we're coming to talk about coexistence and migration type scenarios. So that's Cloud Video Interop. Just wanted to spend a little bit of time around audio conferencing in the context of Teams meetings. So again, the audio conferencing service has been around for a while now. It's been pretty stable and pretty function complete for a while. It provides everything you would expect from a conferencing service. So in meeting invites, you will see, as you can see in the screenshot there, you will see the dial-in numbers which are published. You can also look for a list of local numbers, so users aren't going to be incurring either international charging or charges, or if they aren't able to dial internationally, they've still got a route of joining into your audio conferencing meetings. There's also dial back. So if, for example, you are joining from a virtual machine, which is the scenario I find myself in quite a bit, you can have the audio conferencing service dial out to you, and that will actually bind the number it called to your name on the participant list. So that keeps that kind of nice and simple and straightforward. From an actual dial-in number, Microsoft have a big list of ones that they provide for by default, which is what you kind of get out of the box. What you can then also do is you can request via the Teams admin voice center additional numbers, whether they are free phone numbers or just regular in-country numbers. So the free phone one, some companies like to provide that for people joining in, especially when it's customers dialing into a meeting. The only thing to be aware of with using free phone numbers is someone doesn't pay, or someone has to pay for the call. For free phone numbers, that isn't the person dialing, that's the person who is advertising the number. So in this instance, that would be you. And you do need a way to fund calls to that free phone number, which comes in the form of communication credits, which is basically a pool of money which sits on your Office 365 M365 tenant and is used to fund certain calling scenarios. And the kind of the third option is if you have an existing conferencing number, which everyone is very familiar with, and assuming you do own that number, you can port it to Microsoft phone system and then allocate that as a service number for the dialing conferencing. So you can get that continuation of experience for your end users, that they can still use the legacy conferencing number, which they have grown to know, to kind of connect into Teams conferences. Quick note, which has come up with a couple of customers, conference IDs are dynamically generated. So back in Skype days and with other conferencing services, you can have in effect a static conference ID, which is yours. So for example, a lot of people have had, or a lot of organizations have mapped conference IDs to their company mobile numbers. Microsoft Teams doesn't support that. And when a conference is created, a new conference ID is specifically created for that conference. So again, it's just something to be aware of if any users ask about that. Hiding numbers, I've kind of already spoken about. On network conferencing is an interesting one. So up until now, all conferencing has been done, so in and outbound conferencing has been done via Microsoft phone system and their telco connect, so the calling plan side of things. What they're starting to trial and experiment with is, they call it on network conferencing. It's basically direct routing for conferencing traffic. So what you'll be able to do, and we'll get into this in a bit, well, we'll get into direct routing a bit later on in a couple of slides when we talk about calling. But basically, at a very high level, it's wiring the Microsoft audio conferencing service up to direct routing numbers. So what that means is you can keep your conferencing traffic on net and use your existing provider and their calling rates for outbound conferencing calls. As I said, it's in public preview at the moment. So if you are looking at going down the direct routing telephony integration path, it's probably something to have a look at alongside that as well. Just, I guess, another quick note, audio conferencing does require a dedicated license that is included with E5, and it's available as an add-on for E3. It's also included with Business Voice, if that's a license SKU which you have looked at. That license also includes 60 minutes of dial-out conferencing minutes, and you don't have to assign it to everyone in your organization. It's only users who need the audio conferencing numbers and conference ID in their meeting invite. So if, for example, you have a group of users who are only doing internal meetings with other users and they're always going to be on the Teams client, they don't necessarily have to have the audio conferencing license. And you can save some money on your licensing costs by not buying it for them. And what we generally do as part of an engagement and kind of user profiling, we'll look to see if we can identify those two types of users to get them licensing optimized. So that's kind of the conferencing side of meetings. Devices, there's a very large ecosystem now. It seems that every couple of months there's a new product or new device being added to the ecosystem. I guess the key takeaway is at this point we have devices for Microsoft talks about spaces, but we've basically got devices for each use case and user profile that we've come across. So whether that is USB headsets, which tends to be kind of the default starting point for users, through to spider phones for conferencing rooms, dedicated desk phones for execs and receptionists, and also kind of unmanned areas, so phones in server rooms and in mail rooms and break rooms, those kind of scenarios we can deal with, right up to large meeting rooms and boardrooms, where you've got the Teams room systems, which are bundles of hardware which provide that rich and engaging video conferencing experience. And then also kind of to complement that, you have the smart boards in the form of the Surface Hubs, the 2S being the latest generation, which work and integrate very closely and well with the Teams meeting experience. Earlier on, I mentioned there's a new class of device which got announced at Ignite, which are these Teams panels. So if you ever come across the Condeco Smart Room System or products of that ilk, where you have basically an iPad-ish type screen by every meeting room, and it displays whether it's available or when the next meeting is, and that kind of information. It's very much a class of device which provides that type of functionality. I've not had a chance to play with one of them yet. Hopefully I'm going to be able to speak to one of our suppliers and get one in, or have a play with one, see what the experience is like, and then I can provide a bit more information about exactly how they'll behave and what customization you can apply to them as well. And you've just got a couple of screenshots of kind of what they look like or what they potentially can look like as devices there. As the slide says, there's currently 2 partners providing these in the form of Yealink and Crestron. So yeah, again, it's a nice addition, and it's one of those things, if you're going all in on M365 and Teams is going to be your only collaboration and meeting platform, it's nice to have those rather than having to reach out to a third party. So that's devices. Again, there's a URL in there. Basically, Microsoft have a certification program, so you can go and have a look at all the different devices based on different requirements and sizes of space, and see which ones best fit your requirements. And again, it's quite a nice little wizard that they'll kind of take you through to help you a bit with the device selection. So yeah, so that's kind of the devices. Again, the key takeaway, there's now devices for kind of every use case, price point, and space. Last side of the, or last bit on the Teams meeting rooms. Microsoft about 9 months ago released the Teams Room license, which was a cheaper way of licensing up your meeting rooms for Teams functionality in effect. So you didn't have to buy an E3 and an E5 for them anymore. So that still exists and provides that kind of baseline of service. So it provides the mailbox, it provides the ability to log into Teams and that kind of thing. What they've also done now is they've released the premium license. So this is an enhancement to the standard license and basically looks to put a service wrapper around the Teams room experience. So it's bringing in things like, as the slide says, intelligent monitoring. It's also covering off automated fixing. So if the system detects that there's a problem with a meeting room, it will walk through a series of automated troubleshooting steps to try and get that meeting room back up into a working state. And if it can't, it will then send you through a notification. So what that means is you should be able to keep your meeting room from a technical point of view availability very, very high. And also, if a meeting room does go, for want of a better word, bad, you will get a notification, so you should be able to be proactive about fixing it before a user runs into a problem with it. They're also going to include some capacity planning in here, so it will basically look at a particular building, a particular floor, a particular area of meeting rooms, and in effect give you kind of heat mapping type information. So you can then look for, kind of do your capacity planning 3 months, 6 months, 12 months out, and see which buildings and which areas need additional capacity, which are currently not utilising all their capacity, and then engage in user education to try and drive up the capacity there. So, and my guess is that this premium license is going to have additional services bundled into it as time goes by. So, interesting one to kind of keep an eye on, and possibly do a trial of when you're looking to do either meeting room upgrades or meeting room enhancements as part of a Teams project. So kind of that's meeting rooms, and that's the premium license which is coming along. So that's kind of everything I wanted to cover from a meeting room or from a Teams meeting point of view. Next section, I'm very much going to concentrate on calling. So talk about using or the features and functionality that built into Teams, and how you can go about exploring using it as a PBX replacement service. So again, this is a side of Teams which has come on in leaps and bounds in the last year and a half. So it's a little bit ahead of where things were on the meeting point of view or the meeting side of things. But as of today, it covers the majority of what people expect or what end users expect a phone system to provide. So from the very basics of being able to make and receive a call, and that can be from either a Teams desktop client, from a Teams mobile client, from a Teams client running inside a VDI, which is a scenario which we're coming across quite a bit at the moment. Again, your transfer type functionality, and the transfer also includes safe transfer, which is if you either make a transfer or try and make a transfer and it fails, the call actually comes back to you rather than just disappearing off into the void, which was an issue in the past. So again, enhancements from an end user point of view. Also in keeping with kind of Microsoft's philosophy, which is a user should be able to manage their own kind of call forwarding and call paths. That is all baked into the Teams client. So a user can go in and control whether their calls go to voicemail or not, whether they're forwarding calls off to another member of their team for kind of holiday cover. That's all driven from the Teams client now, as it was in kind of Skype and Link before. One admin enhancement that's in there now is an admin can go in and set someone's call forwarding on their behalf. So if, for example, someone goes on holiday and forgets to set their call forwarding, admins can now go in and do that on their behalf. Reverse number lookup has been enhanced, and I'll talk about that on my next slide. Caller ID policies, again, it's one of those niche features that can help with a lot of specific customer requirements. So the caller ID policies basically allow, so by default, when you make an outbound call from Teams, it sends your DDI number or the number you have allocated to you. For the majority of people, that's absolutely fine. However, there are scenarios where either you don't want to be broadcasting a number at all, so it shows as an anonymous call, or you want to be sending a service desk number or a main reception number. So a lot of C-level individuals don't want their DDI numbers being broadcast. They would rather send the main reception number. So you can use caller ID policies to address those kind of scenarios. And again, as with the majority of Teams features and functionality, you can either target that at a global level or target that as a per user policy. And I guess it's also worth mentioning, not specific to the voice side of things, but Teams is now introducing group-based targeting of policies. So you can basically go into the admin center and assign a policy to a group, and then anyone in that group will receive that policy. And again, it's hierarchical in the same way that Skype was. So if you have an individual policy assigned, that'll take preference. Then it's the group level policy, and finally it's the global policy. So she'll kind of work its way up. Call recording and contact center integration is now available. I've got a slide kind of where I talk about that in a little bit more detail. So yeah, the calling experience is very feature rich now. It deals with the majority of what people expect and want a phone system to do. And yeah, and again, this is one of the activities typically during user profiling. We'll go through and see how individual users are making use of the phone call or the phone system as it stands for in and outbound dialing, and then make sure we can either map that functionality directly onto a feature in Teams, or provide a alternative, ideally better way to provide the same level of functionality. So that's kind of what you can do at the moment. Again, I've just picked out and highlighted some of the features that Microsoft have announced are coming soon in the kind of voice space. So similarly to how the calendaring app got a redesign, Microsoft are looking to rework and redesign the calling app. So that's the calling tab in effect. Just make it a bit easier and more intuitive for users to use and kind of navigate around. So that, I believe, is due before the end of the year, but it's coming soon. Reception consoles. So with the release of the cloud APIs, we're now seeing a couple of vendors starting to beta kind of reception consoles. So when I talk about reception consoles, these are typically for users which take a high volume of calls and have the ability to park calls and transfer calls in a more easy to use manner compared with the regular calling app, which is more designed around taking one call at a time, not at a particularly high volume. So there's some enhancements coming in that space. Enhanced or reverse number lookup. So up until now, Teams has been a little lackluster in this area. It basically was only doing reverse number lookup against your Teams contacts. This is now being expanded out to your Outlook contacts, also contact and user objects in Azure AD, and it will also look at the the from field in the, it's technically still a SIP invite because of where it is in the network, but it will look at the from field on the SIP invite as well, and make a best guess as to what the caller ID should look like on that. So again, it's a nice end user enhancement to kind of help with that experience. From a migration and reusing of existing hardware point of view, Microsoft have announced that they're going to start supporting legacy SIP phones. So when I'm talking about legacy SIP phones, I'm talking about old Cisco handsets, old Avaya handsets that are running a SIP stack on them. And Microsoft are exploring how they can in effect wire those devices up to Teams. It won't be the full Teams experience. It will just be basic in and outbound calling, and I imagine you hold and transfer and that kind of thing, but it will allow you to reuse those existing handsets and existing hardware. I'm assuming there will be, well, there will be a list of approved devices, but I imagine there'll also be a list of required firmwares to be running on those devices as well. Quick note on the calling plan side of things, Microsoft have added another 6 countries to the list, which is good news. It helps with making call plans more viable when we're talking to international customers and customers with offices in multiple countries. So again, a few more European countries added to that list. Honestly, Microsoft have been a bit slow on adding new countries this year. I think that is a combination of the countries that are left are the more difficult ones to get approval in. And obviously COVID, I think, has had an impact on that as well. So I'm expecting next year there to be, again, more additions coming on that one. Probably the biggest announcement for me was the Teams SBA. So SBA, Survivable Branch Appliance, are or was part of Skype for Business, and it provided, in effect, site resiliency. So you would deploy one of these boxes, or you would deploy an SBA to a site. It would have a dedicated telco connection. So that could be an ISDN trunk. More typically, it was a SIP trunk. And then the Teams client will register, so it will connect to that local box. So in the event of a WAN failure, in the event of a loss of internet connection, which is what Teams needs, the Teams clients will still be able to make and receive phone calls. The information, or there's not huge information out about these at the moment, but it's my understanding the first version will just support basic in and outbound PSTN calling. So the ability to dial a mobile number, for example, and receive calls from a mobile number. It won't include peer-to-peer Teams calling, even if you are both homed on the same Teams SBA. Again, the full details of that haven't been released yet, but from my point of view, being able to provide that site level of resiliency in the event of an internet outage is a big bonus, and has been something from a DR point of view which has been a little bit missing up until this point. And again, from what I understand, the way these will be delivered, it'll be very similar to Skype SBAs. So it will be a physical chassis from audio codes or ribbon. They will have single board compute modules in them, and those modules will then run virtual machines, which Microsoft look after and manage kind of on your behalf. So it should be a pretty low management overhead solution. But I imagine when that releases, we'll do a separate webinar that specifically focuses around that and kind of goes through them in a lot more detail and what the call flows look like. Quick note, the advanced communication license wasn't announced at Ignite. It's been around for a couple of months now. There have been some changes to it. So when it initially came out, if you wanted to do call recording or contact center, you had to buy advanced communication licenses. That is no longer the case. Microsoft have dropped that element of the licensing model. So it's going to make Teams contact center and Teams call recording cheaper, which is a good thing. And that's just an example of what we believe, or what Microsoft have presented the new calling experience is going to look like. So the main thing is the dial pad is always going to be there. You can, or they've now also exposed the call forwarding settings and device selection directly in the calling app, rather than having to go into clicking on your face, going into settings, going into devices. So again, helping optimize the experience for users. So that's some of the new things that were announced at Ignite. Next topic is going to be, right, so we've got Teams, we've decided we want to use it as a phone system. How do we go about delivering actual dial tone to users? So when I'm talking about dial tone, I'm talking about the ability to make a call out to a mobile number and someone call in from the network to your, and have your Teams client ring. So the core building block of this is Microsoft Phone System. It is the kind of layer which sits above both calling plans and direct routing, and that is basically where the services sit. So things like auto attendants, which are your menuing type functionality in Teams. So if you ever come across where you ring a number and you get a welcome message followed by a press 1 for sales, 2 for support, that kind of thing, that is a Teams auto attendant providing that. Phone system also deals with call routing. So whether that is applying any call forwarding rules you've got applied to your number, whether it's any hunt group type call distribution, any call queues that have been set up. That's all dealt with the phone system layer, and is a common set of services between calling plans and direct routing. So that is separately licensed. So you do need a phone system license for each user who will be using Teams as a PBX replacement. It's available as an add-on for E3. It's included with E5. It's also included with Business Voice as well. So there's a couple of ways to acquire that side of the licensing. Once you've kind of committed down this route, the biggest technical decision that you're going to make is to either go down calling plans or direct routing. So calling plans is the most simple and straightforward of the two options to implement. It is basically purely using Microsoft phone system and Microsoft's telephony interconnects to make and receive calls. So you don't need a SIP trunk provider anymore. You don't need a third party providing you with numbers and minutes. That's all done by Microsoft. You basically buy a calling plan from them, and a calling plan is a bundle of minutes in effect. So they come in two SKUs, which is domestic, which gives you domestic calling. So, for example, a user in the UK with a domestic calling plan will only be able to dial UK numbers. And then you also have the domestic and international calling plans, which, as the name suggests, allow a user to dial internationally as well. Calling plans are prepaid bundles of minutes as well. So this isn't the kind of model in the UK, which I guess we're more used to, which is you get a itemized bill at the end of each month, and then you pay for all your calls at a particular calling rate. When you buy a calling plan, you get X amount of minutes, which a user can use over the course of a month for funding outbound calls. So it's a little bit of an adjustment. As I said, it's a nice, straightforward, easy way to provide telephony services out of Teams. Microsoft also supports number porting, so you can keep your existing range of numbers. And basically what you do in the same way you would any other DDI range, you raise a porting request, which is Ofcom governed, and your numbers get ported from wherever they are currently to Microsoft's telco partner. And if you're in the UK, that will be Colt Telecom. And then you'll be able to manage all your numbers through the Teams voice portal. So if you need to request additional ranges, you can do that from there, and you can allocate and deallocate numbers from there as well. So as I said, if there are any things, or if you don't have any super advanced telephony requirements, calling plans is a good way to go, and will deliver a completely cloud-based solution which doesn't need any on-prem infrastructure or third-party services to provide that functionality. If for whatever reason you can't use calling plans, so the typical reasons that you can't use calling plans is you have users in a country that doesn't support calling plans at the moment. So as we saw, the list is quite limited at the moment. There's about 15 countries on the list. So if you've got users anywhere else and they want a in-country DDI number, you'll need to look at direct routing. Similarly, if you have a very large existing PBX estate, so I'm not talking about a couple of Cisco call manager nodes here, I'm talking about if you are a large multinational and you have a Cisco call manager estate with 100 nodes in it, and tie lines between those nodes to kind of bypass international calling charges. At that point, you won't want to, or you won't be able to move away from that very, very quickly. So you will implement direct routing to take advantage of your existing calling contracts, to take advantage of your existing tie lines between various areas and sites and regions. So yeah, that's typically when we come across direct routing as being a better solution. And similarly, if you have any again, this is less of a case now because we can do contact center integration, but 6 months ago, if you had a contact center as part of your environment, you would be looking at using direct routing so you can get calls flowing between those two environments. So there's a few use cases for it, and you will generally get better per minute call rates from direct routing versus calling plans. I imagine that is something Microsoft is going to address in the fullness of time. When you're actually looking at direct routing, there's typically 3 flavors of it, for want of a better word. You have the simplest, which is you have session border controllers on premise already, and Microsoft has a certified list of all of these. So you need to make sure whichever one you're using is on that list, and you basically take a new SIP trunk from your on-prem session border controller up into Microsoft phone system. So that's a connection over the public internet, and you kind of go from there. That was the first way to implement direct routing. Since then, Microsoft have introduced a couple of others. So the idea of virtual SBCs. So you, as a customer, can go to Amazon Cloud or Azure and buy a virtual SBC from the store there, and then buy a SIP trunk from Gamma, for example, and wire it up on one side, connect a SIP trunk up to the Microsoft phone system on the other. So you're still looking after and managing and paying for that session border controller, but you don't have that on-prem footprint anymore. So typically, if customers have good in-house skills around the session border controller and the telephony side of things, hosted or virtual session border controllers in the cloud can be a good way to go. And kind of the final option is you don't worry about session border controllers, you just go to a telco who can provide SIP trunking, which is compatible with Microsoft Teams. So again, I'll come back to Gamma. There's also Pure IP and BT and Vodafone and all the other ones out there. But you can go to them and say, can you run me a SIP trunk directly into Microsoft phone system and allocate me some numbers on it? And they will happily do that for you. You'll still be paying for the cost of a SIP trunk, and you will be paying whichever provider you go with for your outbound calls. And you'll also be using their number management platform for requesting numbers and then allocating them out to users. So again, direct routing gives you a lot more flexibility. It helps us with customers who have very particular or specific requirements. Also, if you're looking at analog devices or have a requirement around analog devices, you'll typically have to go down the direct routing route, because you'll need that physical bit of tin with a analog interface that you can plug a phone into. So, but again, calling plans versus direct routing, it's a very large topic, and we'll typically spend a good couple of hours as part of a design workshop going through the pros and the cons, mapping out which solution is best going to meet a customer requirement. And I guess finally, you can mix calling plans and direct routing. So if you have some users in the UK and some in South Africa, for example, you could use calling plans for the UK users and then implement direct routing for those South African users to provide that coverage. So again, that's phone system phone system and calling plans and direct routing. It's a very big and deep and complicated topic, but that's kind of the headlines of where you can go with it and what you can do with it. I'm realizing that I'm just about to run over time, so I will keep talking. If anyone needs to drop off, please do. So this is kind of the most interesting part for me. Microsoft have now GA'd their cloud communication APIs, which are part of the Microsoft Graph, and they basically allow third-party voice services to integrate and leverage Teams directly. So the two big areas at the moment are contact center and call recording. So these, up until now, have been kind of two big blockers for people migrating to Teams. We can now fulfill those requirements. So if you have a requirement to record all your broker calls or all your calls to particular to and from particular users. There are third-party solutions which integrate and provide that. Again, Microsoft have a certification program for that. There's the kind of links on this slide deck as they come out. From a contact center point of view, it's kind of the normal players. So it's Anywhere 365, it's Genesis, it's Five Nines, it's Anywhere 365. And on the call recording side of things, it's Redbox, it's Verint, it's Nice, they're on the list as well now. So it's the kind of big traditional players in the contact center and call recording spaces, which are now offering their services to the Teams platform. A word of warning, as the slide says at the moment, from a contact center at least, it's kind of the version 1.1 flavors of these software. So you only can do it with direct routing at the moment. I imagine in about 3 months' time, they are going to support customers which are using calling plans for the telephony integration as well. The functionality is there from the API point of view. They just need to implement it into their software and then go through the quality assurance loop and that kind of thing. So that will be coming, I'm hoping, early next year, which again will give us more options around how contact center is implemented. And again, up until last month, you would have needed a advanced communication license for this. That requirement has now gone away, which will make implementing these cheaper, which is good. Devices. So if you are moving people from traditional handsets with a dial pad and a receiver, it's going to be a bit of a shock moving them onto soft phones, but there are ways to mitigate that through kind of user adoptions, strong communication and end user training. Similarly, in the meeting room space, there's a very strong ecosystem around devices that Microsoft has certified and approved for use with Teams. Again, most scenarios we now have a device that will meet that requirement. Again, just some examples on screen here. The same devices portal that did meeting rooms also covers off headsets and IP type handsets and USB conference phones. So there's a good resource for that. I guess just quickly on a point of wording of compatibility versus certified. So this particularly comes into play for customers who were on Skype and were using the Poly VVX range of phones. They are compatible with Teams, they aren't certified with Teams. So what that means is a VVX of the right model and release can log into Teams and provide you basic in and outbound dialing. It doesn't give you the full experience that, for example, the Poly CCX 600 would give you, which is kind of the calendar and touchscreen and those kind of functionality. Most of the vendors, so I know Poly were running a trade-in program for VVXs for new toys. So if you do have large estates of those type of devices, please again come and speak to Ultima. We will see what's available on the kind of trade-out side of things. So that was endpoints. And then finally, the obligatory, that's all great. This is how Ultima can help you on your journey to Teams. We can be as flexible and as engaged as you need us to be. So if you've got strong in-house technical skills and you have licenses already, it's definitely worth having a look at partner-led fast track. This is in effect a consulting service that you get free as part of your Microsoft licenses. You can basically call up Ultima as your fast track partner if and when you run into problems and have questions, and we can provide guidance around best practices, how we've helped solve these kind of problems in the past. The warning that comes with fast track is it is a consulting service. It doesn't involve, or it doesn't allow Ultima to do configuration or write documentation or those kind of things for you. But it's a good thing to explore if you have strong in-house technical skills. If fast track isn't a good match for you, we can kind of provide the full stack of professional services through project management, through technical design services, through user adoption, right the way through to kind of floor walking and end user support for go live. So yeah, okay, well, I'm a minute over and I'm out of slides, so that's pretty good timing. Thank you all for your time today. I hope you found the session useful. As I said, if there are any questions or whatnot, I will deal with them offline and get back to you within the next couple of days. Please do look out for the link to the recording for this webinar and also for the PDF PowerPoint or the PDF slide deck. And then I believe your account manager should be in contact as well as kind of a follow-up. But if they don't, please feel free to reach out to your account manager. We can set up further dedicated sessions to kind of help you on that team's journey and go from there. So thank you again for your time and have a good day.